Well, the topic of today is how to clean up the transport sector for the longer future. And my main message is going to be that the car industry can get lower emissions of CO2, but then of course they need to work towards that. And that means we will need a good policy framework enabling the car industry to get to lower emissions.
The European leaders have decided to reduce emissions by 40% at least in 2030 based on 1990 levels. And when we look at things, we see that fixed installations are doing their bit, households are doing their bit, but transport is a nightmare.
Within the automotive industry, we also want to make our contribution to a decarbonized transport in the future. So we do already a lot, but we need to do more. We realize that there are a lot of challenges ahead of us. And so what we want to communicate in first instance is that we welcome the fact that there's now a second mobility package, which is a quite coherent package, where you do not only have the CO2 proposal on what is expected from manufacturers after 2020, but also some enabling factors which are now being offered, like a whole action plan talking to member states to invest in recharging infrastructure for alternative powertrains, which is key in order to increase market acceptance and market uptake for alternative powertrains, including electric.
The challenge that we face is how do we make that energy cleaner? You mentioned air quality. How do we consume that energy in a way that is not damaging to the environment? Energy is absolutely critical to cities, but we need to deliver it in the cleanest possible way.
Until now, there's been a lot of resistance. I think it's very clear that last week there was a proposal of the Commission on CO2 standards, and there has been a lot of lobbying by the car industry, claiming that not much is possible, and that is really totally nonsense. There are many studies out there indicating you can get to lower emissions. You have to include also, of course, electrification of transport, but with all that together, we can get to lower CO2 emissions of the cars. So we can do it, but I think the car industry showed before that they need a bit of push from policymakers.
Well, there's a lot of misconceptions about our role in this debate. So we at ExxonMobil believe in the importance of addressing the risk posed by climate change. We fully support the agreements of the Paris Agreement in COP21, which requires international action. This is a global challenge. It will require global collaboration to address, and we fully support that, and we're ready to play our part in that.
I think the car industry has been quite successful in their lobby efforts. I think it is a bit more difficult now after Dieselgate. I think more politicians are realizing that the car industry has not always played it fair. So I think that is a good development at least. But clearly the car industry is still very powerful, certainly also in a big member state called Germany. So you cannot deny the power of Germany, of course, also in the Brussels policy making. So they are powerful, but I do think that more and more politicians realize that by not putting some pressure on the car industry, in the end we all have to pay a price with pollution, but also competition outside Europe, because China and India are moving faster than Europe, and there the real competition is coming from.
We cannot be blind for the social impact that this transition will bring. We have about 12 million workers working in the automotive sector, if you include also the transport, if you include the aftermarket, if you include all the salespeople. And if you take that into account, then you know that the transition will mean that a number of new jobs will be created in IT, in new technology, so that's clear. But there is certainly also a question that we will have to solve, and that is the impact on workers that will fall out of this transition and due to this transition. For example, we know that the engine, the electrical engine, will only contain, for example, 200 parts in the future. That's much different with the parts that you have in an internal combustion engine, where you have 1400. So just the number of hours that you need to make one engine in an electrical car is very different to the number of hours you need in a traditional engine. So you have 4 million people in the aftermarket today in Europe. 4 million people working mainly on engines. Well, the electrical engine of the future will need less maintenance.